Um, I work for an organization called Organization Solutions, and I'll introduce you to the organization in a little while. My role is to head up our leader services business. So that means that I help organizations build leader and team capability and capacity for growth. Resilience has been a particular subject of interest for me for a long time. I worked with an energy company through a massive reserves crisis. I worked with a bank through the financial crisis. And now, of course, we find ourselves in this uncharted waters of our pandemic, and different people are experiencing that very differently. But I think we can all agree for everybody it is a crisis. So, but resilience is part of being in constant change. And so today I'm going to talk a little around what drives resilience, what are some of the effective characteristics of resilient teams and individuals, and what can we do as leaders, as HR individuals supporting leaders to build resilience in both leaders and teams. But first, let me introduce you to Organization Solutions. We are a global consultancy, and we're headquartered in Singapore. We are about 20 years old now. It's our 20th birthday this year, and we have a team of about 150 consultants around the world. For those 20 years, we've been working with organizations to help them build leader, team, and organization capability for growth and transformation. So change has been a constant part of that for us. We're very grateful we get to work with some amazing companies, some of the most amazing companies around the world, and partner with organizations doing very diverse and different things. So we feel very grateful for that, and it's great work to be part of. To put resilience into context, we have always looked at change, and adversity can look very different, and with constant change comes constant adversity. So we really think about change in the context of the people first principles, and research on change talks around what does it take for people to thrive during that constant change. The first principle that we have within the people first principle is fairness, being fair and seen to be fair. The second is to be inclusive. The third is resilience. The fourth, safety and psychological safety. And lastly, trust. And today we're really going to talk about resilience itself. So let's start with what resilience is. There are many definitions of resilience, and they are pretty wide ranging. There are some consistent themes that we see both in the research and practice of resilience. But for me, it boils down to three things. And luckily they rhyme. I love words that rhyme. So first of all, to be able to survive. Resilience is about surviving in the face of adversity. It's about being able to cope and deal with obstacles that come your way. The second thing is about thriving. It's about taking that adversity and really finding a way to turn it on its head and grow from it, and use that momentum to strive forward, to push forward and adapt. Sometimes we'll find that resilience is defined without that strive, without that forward momentum, without that adaptation for the future. But I think for organizations, leaders and teams, that's a really critical part of the definition. We have to use adversity in order to adapt for the future. Let's take this pandemic crisis, for example. We all know that the world is going to be a different place after this crisis than it was before. Some of those changes will be subtle and some of them will be really vast. And so we can't go back as businesses, leaders and teams to what was before. We have to adapt. We have to change for the future to be able to be successful. So for me, resilience is those three things that are embedded in practice, it's embedded in research: surviving, thriving, and striving for the future. But why is it important? So intuitively, we know that resilience is important. It feels right. And if you ask people in survey form to say, is resilience an important part of performance, then normally you get about 70 to 80% of people saying that it is indeed important. But when we actually look at the literature, we find why. Why is that the case? And the first thing is that resilience impacts performance at an organizational level and at an individual level. Primarily because you can imagine it, we have people who are resilient. They're able to keep going when things get tough. They're able to push through, able to come up with new ideas, and therefore they can perform in the long term. They can continue to be successful. So we do see a direct link through from people who are resilient and teams who are resilient to strong performance. But resilience is also important for factors that are then important for performance. So for example, if we look at engagement, if we look at job satisfaction and happiness, if we look at all of those things that make someone sticky to an organization and stay with them, intention to stay, organizational commitment, these are the things that also are impacted by resilience. Again, because resilient people can go with the ebbs and flows. They're not put off too much by things that change or demands that increase. And the last thing, and this is really where a lot of the conversation at the moment is around, is resilience is important to burnout and depression and symptoms like that. So more resilient people and people who have built resilient practices tend to be less burnt out. They tend to have less mental health issues, less anxiety, and are less prone to depression. So as we think about now in the near future, and we think about the mental health implications of what we're going through, building resilience in your organization is really critical to support your employees and also to help mitigate some of those impacts to the business. But what drives resilience? Now, interestingly, resilience is a bit about who you are, and it's also about what you do. So here you can see a pie chart, and on one side we've got 43%, and on the other side we have 57%. So part of this pie chart represents who you are, sort of the natural characteristics that someone has that makes them more likely to be resilient. And the other side represents things that they do. What are the practices that resilient people and resilient leaders put in place? So the balance is actually skewed towards who you are. So about 57% of how resilient a person is defined by their nature, their characteristics, their personality, factors like that. And about 43% is about practices. Now, what's great about that is 43% of resilience is driven by things that can be changed and learned and adapted. So when we're thinking about increasing the capability and capacity to be resilient and to manage in adversity, we have loads of space to play. We've got loads of things that we can do differently. Now let's look at each of those in turn. Let's look at the characteristics of resilient people first of all. So what we find is, and I think we all know someone who's super resilient naturally. I was working with a team in a large energy company recently, and they work for a leader who they say he's so laid back, he's almost horizontal. Nothing phases him. He's able to deal with any crisis, anything that comes up. He's completely calm, composed, and probably one of the most resilient people they've met. So that idea of self-control and composure plays a really important role in resilience. We also see that that structure, that ability to structure how you're going to approach a problem. So as issues come up, as problems come up, looking at stepping back and looking at the problem objectively and providing a structured approach is really critical. It provides a sense of control, which is a critical element here as well. And resilient people keep going. So there we start to see the link with grit, that is about perseverance, it's about keeping going when things get tough. Resilient leaders are also pretty flexible. So they can take assets that they have or solutions that they know, and they can think flexibly around what could they do differently. They have a sense of curiosity that helps them think of problems and issues in an interested way about the possibilities, the different solutions. I had one leader in a large healthcare company to say to me, it's about mindset. He said, whatever the challenge I've set myself is, no matter how this goes, I'm going to come out better. I'm going to come out different. I'm going to come out improved. In fact, he was recommending his team, and he was doing this himself, is to journal as he went through this, as he's going through this pandemic crisis, and it's all very live for him right now. What's he learning? What's changing? What's adapting? What's he interested in? So he's really taking note of these things and using it as a learning opportunity for himself. He's curious. The other things that we see commonly in resilient leaders and individuals is a self-confidence. They believe that they can achieve and that they can overcome whatever the problem is, whatever the adversity is. They have that self-confidence that they are going to be okay. They're going to be able to manage the situation, and a sense of optimism that everything's going to be okay. Not a naive optimism, but generally they see things in a positive light, which helps them manage stress and it helps manage pressure. So some of those natural characteristics are what we see in leaders. Now, there is a bit of a dark side to this. So when we assess leaders and their capability for resilience, we look at who they are and we also look at what they do to help them understand their own capability in this area. And one thing we notice from the research is that leaders who are really high in resilience, the dark side that we find is that actually for their team that can be quite difficult, because if they believe that they can overcome, they're super resilient, everything's going to be okay, sometimes they don't realize that their team may be in a different place or not as confident as them, and that's a challenge for their team to have those conversations. So if you do recognize yourself as a highly resilient individual, then just think carefully about the impact on your team, and are you having the right kind of conversations that allow them to raise their concerns too. So moving on to what do resilient people do, what we see, as well as having these natural characteristics, they are putting practices in place, solving problems. So for example, they're looking at current assets they have and they're applying them in different ways. So one, for example, a retail organization we're working with right now, they've identified a whole new segment of the market, which is around older people coming on stream online to purchase in a very different way than they had done before the lockdown and before the pandemic. And so they've actually created this whole new team using the same channel information that they had before, but to address the specific opportunity that they've identified. The second thing resilient leaders do is they build support networks. They have people that they can go to support them, and that's important for two reasons. One, emotional support is really important. One thing I would really strongly encourage leaders to do is get comfortable with being emotional and sharing that emotionality and sharing that emotionality. It becomes important in team resilience later, but certainly to manage the pressure and manage the stress, you need to have a network around you who can support you. But also, the network is important for perspectives and ideas. So this curiosity, this flexibility, this ideas of how do we come up with different solutions and adapt, experimenting and trying things, you want to get new ideas. So for example, our CEO roundtable, we have a CEO roundtable from CEOs across different industries that we bring together. And they had a session, it was interesting actually, because normally most of them are traveling. And so we reached out to them and asked them if they'd like to come together for a bit of an ad hoc session. And because everyone is saving time on travel, they were able to reallocate that time to joining us and joined us for a session on COVID and different organizations' response. And what we heard from all of them was that they all went away with new ideas and new perspectives to try in their organization. And they'd talked and they'd shared together on a peer level what different points of view and approaches were. So support networks are important. And then lastly, maintain that positive energy. So this is about wellness, and it's about health, and it's about making sure that you are keeping yourself well physically, mentally, and spiritually. So you've got energy, you're taking breaks. Breaks are really important. You're sleeping. You're trying to eat well. All those classic things that we know nourish our body and give us the ability to keep going and deploy the energy that we need. So these two things, so on an individual level, when we look at what drives resilience, we look at both the who we are and the what we can do. And some of those practices that we put in place, we can address, that helps both the leader and the team build their resilience more. When we look at it through a group lens, and we look at what drives resilient teams or what makes resilient teams, it's pretty similar. We see similar themes, flexibility, change, but because of the group nature, we start to see other things become important as well. So the first category of resilient practices we see in resilient teams is about connecting. So connecting to one another. Resilient teams have strong identity as a team. They really see themselves as a team, and they have great communication practices. So one leader that we were working with has what he calls, and I've got to get this right, it's a lockdown showdown meeting. So every week they get together and he talks about 3 things that he's done differently. So he's created a communication structure where everybody comes together, talks about what they're doing differently, what's going well, what isn't going well. And the communication cadence is not just about task, but it's about how people are feeling and what's going on for them and the team, which serves those 2 purposes of staying connected, but also it gives him the ability to understand what's actually going on in his team. One thing that he's looking for is the quiet people. So he says, I always notice if I'm not hearing from people because I need to tap into that more because potentially they're the ones who are struggling with stress and maybe their heads are a bit underwater right now. They may be homeschooling, looking after parents under some pressure. So he uses that as an ability to also sense check within his team as well. One thing we know from the research on virtual teams is that teams are working more remotely, its conflict can become more difficult to address. And the trust in the team is so important that maintaining the ability to have constructive conflict becomes really important. So as a leader, again, if you're sensing that there are situations where either interpersonal or task conflict is starting to happen, then I'd be really encouraging you to step in early and address that. But by doing that, this is it's a crucible for team bonding. You know, if you can build the trust now as you're going through this really difficult stage, that's really sticky trust. And a team that really works through this kind of difficult environment together, they have strong bonds, they have strong trust, and they really believe in their ability to achieve together. So connection, identity, trust, communication. Secondly, clarity. Another thing that we know about virtual teams is that clarity of priorities is really critical. And this situation is no different. The ability to know what's important both from an organizational level and also from a team and individual level becomes really important. So you might want to implement practices at the beginning of the week where you're clarifying what your top 3 priorities are, what your top 3 priorities for your teams are, and making sure everybody is clear on what their top priorities are for that week or that day or whatever your cycle makes sense. Having that clarity is critical. The other thing that happens in this sort of situation is that processes, the ambiguity in processes becomes really easy to spot. So if there's a lack of accountability or unclear handoffs, because people aren't sitting next to each other and able to to manage that between them, these areas are suddenly come to the surface, and it's a great opportunity to fix that as well and provide clarity on process. And finally, on purpose. One of the things that's really critical for a team is to have a clear purpose, and it's very bonding. It really supports well-being and it drives engagement. Now, you might find that actually your purpose of your team is evolving right now. One team I'm working with, interestingly, their purpose has really shifted. So they work with a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises. They're supporting them in their platform. And one of the things that their CEO told me was that he's really pivoting that from thinking about them as enabling business to helping these small and medium-sized businesses survive. And really, he's galvanizing the team around this new reinforced purpose And that's part of his communication mechanism. So I'd be encouraging you as well right now to reflect back with your team on what is your purpose? What is your purpose longer term? How is the work that you do connected to the wider organization? But right now, in this moment, what is the purpose that bonds you? So clarity of processes, clarity of capabilities. So do you have the right people doing the right work? And then clarity of purpose. Lastly, control. A lack of control leads to high stress environment for people. So teams who have a sense of control and confidence in their own ability are more resilient. So I would encourage you to enable that control. So where you can, for example, if you can shift working patterns, if you can give your team members the ability to be flexible and fit around home requirements, homeschooling requirements, different working hours with their spouse, whatever they need, taking that control, taking that flexibility, how they actually approach their work. So where there is the opportunity to provide some additional control, that's a great way of strengthening the resilience in the team. The other factor that we want to look at when we're thinking about how do we strengthen resilience is not just the person, it's not just the personality and the practices of the person, but it's also the situation as well. The interesting thing is you can't have resilience if you haven't got adversity. And one way to think about the need for resilience is actually by reducing the adversity in the situation as much as is possible. So thinking about the job and the environment that the individual, that the leader, that the organization is experiencing. Within that, you're looking at resources and you're looking at demands. So ideally, in any situation, you're going to have high resources for things like assets and like practical resources to do your job, people, capabilities. It might be other things like working out the feedback and coaching and support and autonomy in the role itself. And when you have high demands that balance that as well, so those would be things like workload, challenge, stakeholder engagement. Actually, high demand and high resource environment leads to work engagement. It's engaging, it's exciting, there's energy, people are moving, they feel like they're doing something of worth. When you find people in a situation where those resources are lower, but the demands are higher, that can lead to burnout. And that is the situation that we find a lot of people in right now. Over the course of the past few months, they've seen demands go up. They now are in COVID meetings as well as their regular meetings. They might be supporting their organization in a different way. The organization has actually changed shape significantly around them. Their customer base is suffering. And at the same time, the resources have reduced. They're all further away from people. Communication is not so clear. So they are more likely to find themselves in a burnout situation. And those people you want to be identifying early and supporting, either by reducing the demands. So that might be really being clear about what are the priorities and saying no to those additional meetings. It might be about making sure that the organization more broadly knows what you're working on and what you can expect from your team right now, or increasing the resources. So these resources look like checking in, they look like communication, they look like feedback, they look like information and access to a broader, feeling connected with the organization, as well as pure practical resources as well. Now, interestingly, there's another group of people who we are noticing in organizations, and that is a group who actually don't have a lot to do. So there's a bunch of people whose role has just exploded, and they tend to be senior leaders. They tend to be people across the organization. HR is a classic example of this, where suddenly there is just so much to do and burnout is a potential problem. On the flip side, we're seeing people with very little to do, so maybe in specialized roles where leadership programs aren't happening right now, for example, or there isn't so much focus on a particular customer segment. And so their workload has actually gone down. Their resources remain relatively high, but their demands have gone right down. And this group is also at risk. They're also at risk of stress and pressure, because boredom is also stressful, very stressful. So as a leader, when you're thinking about the resources you have across your team, look at who's got capacity and how you could use it. So one financial institution we're working with, for example, has started a gig board. And anything that needs to get done is being written on the gig board, and people can pick it up. They're being encouraged and incentivized to pick up the gigs and do them. And actually, when I was talking to their department head, she said to me, actually, it's going really well. People are really excited about the possibility of getting involved in different things. We'd experiment. We weren't sure whether there'd be take up, and there's loads of take up. People are excited about trying something new or getting involved, working with different people. So again, you might want to experiment. I think now is a great time to experiment. It's a really great time to experiment and build the capability to experiment, because we know that that is also related to an organization's capability for growth. Experimenting and trying new things drives business, it drives business performance. So thinking about what's actually happening in the environment, and when we assess resilience, we look at all three of those. We look at somebody's natural capabilities, we look at their practices that they put in place, and then we look also at the resources and demands in their environment, and we use all of that data to help them identify what the strategies they want to put in place for themselves and their team are to build resilience. Now, for many leaders, you may be coaching leaders who manage people. So if you're leading a really complex organization, you're going to have a leadership team underneath you who are managing teams themselves. For that one-on-one coaching, I'd encourage you to look at both practices that are going to help relieve stress and also adapt for the future. So for example, some of these things that you might be coaching your direct reports around are relieving stress by enhancing those positive emotions, so building gratitude and optimism. For example, a practice might be on a Friday morning just blocking 15-20 minutes off in your calendar to write to 2 or 3 people to say thank you, or you've done a great job, or that was a great idea. And ask, crowdsource these ideas. I get people to say who they think is deserving of a great well done this week. So just to enhance those positive emotions, to enhance that optimism. The way that you're framing perspectives. We were talking to an organization that was potentially looking at being spun off, and the leader there said, look, I can't tell our organization everything. There's a lot I can't tell them, but what I can help them work through is what would happen if we were spun off? Like, what's the possibilities there? What are the opportunities? What could that potentially look like? And by framing it in an optimistic way and having people walk through that, imagining the unimaginable, he actually said by the end of it, I had a few of my team members saying, this sounds great. I think I would like to be spun off. So building mindfulness skills, being able to observe and step back, very important. And then also connecting to that sense of purpose, as we talked about before. Adapting for the future, developing that growth mindset, looking at experimentation, trying new things. Who could they be connecting with? How could they be strengthening their support network, both within the organization itself and more broadly? And then also, what are those physical and mental wellness routines that they have in place for themselves? And keep it super simple. Keep it like, if it's sleep, focus on sleep. If it's walking once a day, focus on that. If it's taking micro breaks throughout the day, focus on that. Like, that's all really important. Making sure that it's really practical and possible is really critical in those situations, rather than loading up with a bunch of things that just get too hard to do. So just before we move into questions, I want to leave you with a few resilience routines that we see as best practices. We see leaders across a broad range of organizations doing these things, they tie nicely into building resilience for leaders and their teams. The first one is to put a communication cadence in place. So have check-ins with your team members, notice who's going quiet, who's not quite themselves. If you're leading through layers, do a skip level check-in. dip into the organization, find out what's going on, coaching your team members on building their resilience practices. When you do have a communication cadence in place, listen. Listen. Don't just broadcast, but also receive. And think about how can you share your experience of this particular scenario. What are you doing differently? What are you experiencing? Make it be okay to not be okay by sharing, when you're not okay, or a little bit of vulnerability on the call. It'll go a long way for everybody else to feel like it's okay to be wherever they are right now. Prioritizing and reprioritizing for teams and individuals. So really consciously thinking about that and keeping those priorities nice and clear. Grant control where you can, where that's possible, and encourage experiments. Role modeling is really critical in the situation. Vulnerability is a power. Resilience really is a team sport. So bringing this all together and making sure people know that what you're doing and how you're adapting, and giving them the opportunity to do the same is really important. And lastly, invest in your own well-being. You can't pour from an empty cup. You have to have enough in your reserves in order to support your team. So before we move on to questions, I just want to leave you with a few ways of keeping in touch with us, getting in touch with us. So as I mentioned, we have a resilience assessment and resources that we use with a large number of clients right now. That we've written some articles on that. So if you're interested in learning more, you're very welcome to contact me. You can learn more about our growth services at organizationsolutions.com or connect with us through LinkedIn. We also have our Grow newsletter every quarter, where we produce information and leader resources on growth and transformation practices. And lastly, we've actually just launched our second season of our Growth Leader podcast. So our CEO, Alison Irene, is running a podcast series with leaders who drive growth from a variety of different organizations, and they share their insights. We would love to stay connected. So thanks. Enrique, shall we go over to questions?
Yes, we shall. And give me 1 second. Hello, everybody. Again, Corinne, thank you so much. This was amazing and, very powerful, considering all the things that we're going through these days. And I'm going to go back to the LinkedIn Live. So everybody, please forgive me. I am managing, 3 computers at the same time to get this done. And fortunately, it's not midnight for me. So that's that makes it a little easier to manage all these things simultaneously. So everybody, please, if you have any questions, any comments that you want us to bring to Corinne, please post them on the chat. We have a great comment here, Corinne, and I wanna hear some of your thoughts about it. Gail, one of our Hacking HR great friends, she's saying, in a world where performance management has long been misunderstood and done pretty badly as well, to be pointing out that there's room for improvement. The use of telling people how great they are, how well they're doing, how they are adding value, and how appreciated they are in clear terms is staggeringly important. So, we've done this idea of performance management, which has been around for so long. I mean, the way we do performance management today, the annual rating-based performance management, which we all agree that doesn't work, and versus the idea of providing ongoing, constant feedback, but also praising people for the work that they're doing, is just so powerful. And we need more of that positive reinforcement. So anything you want to add on that comment and on this in this sense?
I think that for me, it's about the sense of confidence. And if I think about resilience and the link of resilience to performance, underlying that is a sense of confidence in self and team. And we can build that. You can naturally be confident, but actually the leader plays a critical role in that. Feeding back when things are done well, when they are appreciated, providing a positive lens on people's efforts as well as outcomes is really critical, and then plays into that self-confidence, and then plays into people's experience of psychological safety. And if you have people in a safe environment, they're more likely to take risks, and I mean good risks. You know, try new things, experiment, and then that leads, as I've mentioned before, you know, that leads to innovation and it leads to business success. So I absolutely agree. Having a mechanism to provide positive reinforcement is critical in order to have a high-performing team.
Yeah, I want to ask you something. What's the relationship between the idea of resilience and sacrifice? And I'm going to give you one very tangible example. You are awake and it is probably 1 a.m., almost 1 a.m. for you right now. So you are sacrificing, you know, part of your sleep to be here with us. And a lot of people in the workplace now, because we enter into this reality of, you know, an online interconnected world, a lot of people are resilient, but at the same time, they are sacrificing something to continue to deliver the value, you know, whether it is staying up until midnight, whether it is, you know, connecting a little later in the evening because now they have to take time in the morning to homeschool their children. So what is the relationship between resilience and sacrifice? And this is just out of my personal curiosity, by the way. Nobody asked this question.
Yeah, I mean, so as you say that, I think about the idea of energy and managing your energy. So I think if you, rather than thinking about it as sacrifice, I imagine it as things that take your energy and things that give you energy. So obviously, you know, staying up till midnight, whilst very engaging, and actually I'll probably be quite buzzing when we finish the session, means that tomorrow morning I'm likely to be tired. So I know that, and I have to structure my day around that and make sure that I'm managing my energy flow. Now, I'm fortunate my role and my bosses themselves are pretty comfortable with that idea of flexibility. So I have the control. I have the ability to control my energy and my working pattern to some degree. But again, I think that covers everything. Taking control and knowing yourself, and being compassionate to yourself. You know, not judging yourself for being too weak or not being strong enough, or that somebody else is pushing harder, but really being realistic and managing that energy for yourself is key, I think, here.
Yeah, a lot of the concepts that you were sharing today and talking about today reminded me of the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I don't know if, I guess you've used that part of that framework, which, you know, it's just fascinating. I mean, for those of you who have not read the book by Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the book Flow, I'm going to be sharing the link of his name, which is it's a Hungarian name, so I don't even know if I'm saying it right. But have you?
I was going to say you're probably the only person I've ever met who knows how to pronounce that.
I'm hoping so, and the book is just fascinating, and it's a very heavy, powerful book about what you're saying, Corinne, which is, whether you are staying up midnight doing the one thing you love doing. I mean, you're drawing energy from that one thing. It's not that sacrifice. It is like, that's the one thing that engages you. That is the one thing that energizes you. And whether you're tired tomorrow, you're going to be, buzzing with adrenaline because you're like, well, I was up at midnight doing this one thing that we love. So how do we connect in the workplace, at least in the workplace? How do we connect this idea of resiliency, but also with the idea of helping people find their voice, their purpose, their meaning, and doing the things that we love? We all know that when we go to work, we're gonna end up, we're given a promise. You're gonna be doing here all these things, and then you end up doing something else. But how do we create that balance between resilience, finding this flow, finding purpose and meaning at work, while also doing the transactional things that all of us end up doing at work?
I mean, for me, it's about knowing yourself, right? Knowing what's the work that's going to give you energy and what's the work that's going to take away energy. And in an ideal world, we're in a situation where obviously there's more of the former, there's more resources, right? There's more of those resources, there's more things that are buoying you up and making you strong than the demands, the things that maybe de-energize you. Now, in the realistic world, you're going to have to do both, and leaders actively have to do both. I feel, I was asked a question about vulnerability and authenticity and resilience. And how do you balance being authentic and vulnerable and real about the challenges you're facing and at the same time leading people? And the reality is you have to do both. You have to show vulnerability and you have to give people a sense of consistency and control. Now, from your own point of view, you may find one energizes you and one doesn't, and you have to just manage that through. Now, obviously, one really great way of finding that flow is connecting to a purpose. So as a leader, thinking about how the work that your team is doing is connecting to their own personal purpose and also helping them connect to the wider organizational purpose is a great place to start. But I think it's about being realistic and sensible and knowing where you are, and putting strategies in place.
I love that. And, the idea of vulnerability is especially important today because, we're all going through a very complicated situation and it is affecting us, all of us. We're all being impacted by this in different ways. Some people are losing their jobs. Some people have lost family members, and some people have lost friends and co-workers. So we're all suffering and going through some level of pain in a different way. And I think there's never been a better time in our history, when we're all going through the same, to show how vulnerable and how human we are, and that we are, suffering, and that we don't have the answers to all the questions. This is especially true for business leaders. I like to share the story about, business leaders showing themselves as humans when they are at their homes doing a town hall for their company.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, yeah, it is just like show yourself as you are, show your authentic self, because what you're doing is also encouraging others to do the same thing as well. You're encouraging others to be human. So we got
I had a great story on that, actually. There was a leader. So someone was telling me the story, and she started off. So this was right at the beginning of the crisis. Maybe it was sort of February time. First time she was doing this, working from home town hall, and so she's there behind her computer. She's got so she works in the financial industry, so she's suited. She's got it all on. She doesn't really know how to work the Zoom technology, but she's remote calling her assistant who's helping her out. It's all a bit clunky, but she gets there. And then she's on this town hall, and behind her, these two little kids come in, and they're standing behind her, and everyone on the town hall smiling and laughing and engaging, and she doesn't know what's going on, and she realizes the kids are there, and suddenly everything goes blank. A couple of minutes later, the screen picks up, no kids. 2 weeks later, it was the next town hall. In that time, the world had completely changed. She knew exactly how to get onto Zoom. Her outfit was a little bit more relaxed. Her children were playing in the background, and she was absolutely fine. And in that 2 weeks time frame, what had become acceptable, what she'd wanted to role model, how she wanted to show herself and engaging with the whole organization in that town hall had completely changed. Yeah. And I think it's really important because adversity doesn't just look like now. It doesn't just look like crisis. High growth in very successful markets brings adversity. So the skills we're building now are really important for any stage through the growth cycle. And that's what we're really cultivating, is the ability for people to build and maintain as they go through the rest of their career as things change.
I love that. And actually, what a coincidence. I posted something yesterday on my LinkedIn because I was sort of reminiscing about this book called The Ascent of Man by Jacob Bronowski. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's just a fascinating book. And when they said man, they meant humankind. This was a different time when, people would refer only to men as humans and not, women in there too. But the book is fascinating. And one of the things he says is that, people find joy and meaning not just in the craft of doing something, in the art of making something happen, but in the skills that you're learning and in the perfection, the constant perfecting of the process to make that thing happen. And it's exactly what you're saying. We're all going through a very complicated time when we don't know exactly how the world could look like 1 week from now. But what we do know is that the skills that we are cultivating every day as we go through this crisis will prove to be very, very important and fundamental for whenever this is ready. So, when we look back, we may say, we didn't exactly know what was going to happen, and maybe we missed the targets on goals and things and profits and whatnot. But look at all the skills and look at all the things that we learned in the process, and how all these things that we learned are going to become so useful going forward. And that's, at least to me, that's one of the gifts out of this crisis, that we are learning so much, and that we can utilize all these lessons and all these capabilities and all these skills that we are either learning or relearning to help us, to propel us forward for whenever this is, this is over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Corinne, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I tagged you on the LinkedIn live chat. You're going to see a lot of stuff going on in there. Thank you for being with us at midnight. So really appreciate it. Everybody, thank you. Everybody, thank you so much for being with us. This is going to be fun. The next workshop will be at 11 a.m. Pacific time, which is in 1 hour and 12 minutes from now. So I'm not going to leave the LinkedIn Live on. I'm going to be turning it off, and there will be a new link created that I'm going to be sharing via email in about 45 minutes. So please stay tuned to my LinkedIn profile at about 10:45 Pacific time, which is coming up in 45 minutes. You're going to see the new LinkedIn Live session coming up. We're going to have a session by IBM called Workforce Reentry in the Different Normal. So IBM will be sharing their amazing research on all the work they have been doing to sort of redesign the way people will work and the way the workplace could look like going forward. So please stay tuned. We're going to be coming up with you in about 45 minutes to an hour. Corinne, once again, thank you so much for being with us today. It was an honor to have you with us.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.